Today I'm going to talk to you guys about how we did the airbrushing, weathering, and rusting techniques on our Fallout New Vegas Courier 6 cosplay. If you're new here and you find these techniques to be useful and entertaining, please click that subscribe button to get more content just like this coming to you in the future. And again, if this video helps your cosplay, please click that like button below to help the channel grow. The foam armor and props featured in this tutorial were created by my significant other for his cosplay. I actually just did the airbrushing, weathering, and rusting techniques, so that is all that I will be covering in this video. If you would like future content on armor building or foam building, please leave a comment below and we can put that into consideration for more videos. For this project, I'm going to use my Iwata Gravity Feed airbrush. I really particularly like this model because it does have a valve at the bottom that allows you to adjust the air pressure without having to actually adjust your compressor, which is really nice, especially if you're working on projects such as this where you're doing a lot of smaller detail work and then larger shots. I will leave the link below with the product information so you can check it out for yourself. To begin airbrushing this project, I took Tester's silver airbrushing paint and I began to airbrush the main forms over the mask. What I like to do when I'm working on something that is metallic is I actually like to use the metallic airbrushing paints instead of metallic spray paint, because in the past I've had problems with the spray paint reacting to acrylic paints later down the road and causing it to peel off. The one statement I will have to say about metallic airbrushing paints is you do need to mix them very well or they will clog up inside of your airbrush. You can see here that I'm taking the silver paint and just kind of placing it all over the entire form to give it a light glow, but also highlighting the main spots where I want the silver to come through when I go through later and I begin the actual weathering techniques on the mask. Once I'm satisfied with the base layer of silver and I've allowed it to dry, I'll take a couple drops of black paint and mix it into my silver paint, and then begin to go into the crevices and corners of the mask and start defining them using this darker shade. I will make sure that I have gone in and I will actually turn the pressure down on my airbrush to allow it to not splatter and get me some crisper lines into my mask itself. While the paint is still wet, I will take a natural sponge for my post-apocalyptic and my weathered armors, and I will take that sponge and I will dab into the crevices to create a stippled or textured effect with the darker paint that allows to spread it out and also starts to create texture and interest in the piece. Once again, after that first layer of stippled texture is dry, I'll go back in, add a little bit more black paint to my silver mix, and continue to airbrush in the fine details and stipple until I feel that it has the desired overall texture for the base layer that I'm going for. This stage is also a great opportunity to start building in those crevices and darker details. So here where the respirator portion meets the mask, I've gone in, taken that airbrush and gone deeply into that crevice and added a darker pigment than the rest of the mask. Here's a quick before and after so that you can see the difference that makes. It's such a subtle, easy trick to do to add some depth very quickly to your piece. Once your first layer of shading dries, then it's time to take that same shade of color that you used before and start going into all of the crevices and details. Start blending that out with a natural sponge to create texture. It's really important to layer your texture and not just go with a darker shade to begin with, because that will allow it to blend more seamlessly and naturally with the piece than it would if you did that with a darker shade to start off with. You will also see that I go in and I will go over the same spot multiple times with the airbrush and blend it out This also again is part of building color. It is important though to keep working the entire piece and not focus on one area too heavily in the beginning, because then when you get further down the road it is harder to blend that out if you focus too heavily in one spot. Another thing you will see is a lot of times I will take my hand and I will start mirroring the motion that I plan to spray paint or airbrush into prior to doing that. So again, I will start tracing out the outline before I let any paint come out of the airbrush. And this is a great technique to do. It starts to train a little bit of your muscle memory, and you will get a little bit better, more controlled airbrushing when you do this. It's also important to make sure that you take breaks in between when you're doing techniques like this, to allow the paint to dry, but also to give yourself a break, because this is pretty taxing on your wrists and arms. Again, please remember to stretch. Carpal tunnel is bad for artists. Jumping ahead a little bit with the airbrushing process now, this is the result of what you get after you have layered quite a few layers of that shading down. I did go in, and as I went, I did continually add a little bit more black into the airbrushing paint that I was mixing with to create a little bit deeper shadows. And again, I was following the form of the piece, using that natural sponge to blend out in locations. I think at this point I was pretty happy with the results of the shadow shading. After letting the piece dry, I felt that at this point we were losing some of the blending and some of the shadows were becoming a little bit too harsh. So I went back in and I decided to add some highlights along the edges of the form using that silver from the very beginning, so that's silver metal metallic testers paint. Here, to use the airbrush, I turned the pressure way down so that I could get in very close to the edges and add some very strong highlights without splattering. I think this allowed to get some really nice like shine and hot spots, and it really seemed to give the piece a little bit more depth. After that, I went in and did some little bit more overall spraying to again just add some highlight to the piece and soften some of those shadows where I felt that they became too harsh. Around here I was feeling pretty good about the piece, so I allowed it to dry overnight, and then I moved on to the resting techniques to give it a little bit more of a weathered effect. The resting technique we used was actually done in a tutorial by Courier Cosplay, link is in the description below. It requires using a glue. We found Elmer's glue to be the best in this case, and iron filings that are applied to the surface. Once the filings are dry, a solution is sprayed onto it, which creates a rusting effect. When applying the iron filings, I had two techniques to get them into place. I found that a brush in some areas would remove the iron filings as soon as you put them into place. So I found that pouring them worked better for solutions where the area was harder to get to or it was a sharper edge. For more flat areas, I ended up using either my finger or a brush to tap it into place. If you are using a brush, I found that if you add a little bit of glue to that brush first, it helps to pick up more of the iron filings and then in turn deposits more iron filings onto the surface. Once the glue has dried, I sprayed it with the resting solution and then applied peroxide to help the reaction process. I did find that you had to be careful with how much you sprayed, as it will cause rust lines to run down your piece. Now in part 2 of this series, when we do the body armor, I actually ended up using that dripping rust effect to my advantage, as well as the spray effect that you'll see happens. It's kind of like a nice splatter effect, which is a really cool weathering technique. But again, you can get results that you don't like if you're not careful about how you use the spray bottle and how much you spray out at a time. To help accelerate the reaction process, I used a hairdryer on high setting to heat up the iron filings and the glue, which allowed it to rust a little bit faster. We did find though, as we were doing this process, that the best way to do this was actually to spray it on and then leave it overnight, because the rusting process really kicks it into high gear after a couple hours. Like the airbrushing before, I went in and added more spots of glue and iron filings to rest different locations until I was satisfied with the overall look and feel of the piece. Once I felt that I had enough rust locations, I went through again, added a little bit more peroxide to some of the areas to allow it to develop a little bit more rust, and then let it dry overnight. These are the results that we got of the rusting process the next morning. You can definitely see how the rust really developed overnight and created some really nice effects for post-apocalyptic cosplays like this. That is all for part 1 of this video series. I hope you guys will join me for part 2, where we talk about rusting and weathering larger body armor, which can be quite challenging just due to the sheer size and aspects of that. We will also going to be talking about stenciling, as well as using that rusting solution to create a pretty cool textured effect on pieces. Something I figured out as I was going along, and I think it turned out pretty great, so I cannot wait to share that with you guys. If you found this video helpful, please once again give me a like down below and subscribe to this channel for more content just like this, and you guys have a beautiful rest of your day.